This is Alex Claibornes. Today is Thursday, May 30th, 2024. 30 years ago, our friend John Windrow, who grew up with us in Brownsville, Tennessee, was a staff writer for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. As we approach the 80th anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 1944, I'd like to read an article that John wrote for the Star-Tribune on Monday, August 15, 1994. The article is titled, "As Anniversaries of War Pass By, Memory Speaks the Oft-Told Tales." When I was a boy working at my old man's gas station in Tennessee, he had a man who worked for him named Mr. Verl. He had a big U.S. Navy anchor tattooed on his forearm. I asked him about it once, and after dismissing it as useful foolishness, Mr. Verl mentioned offhandedly that he had guarded Tojo Hideki in Japan after the war, before the Allies hanged him. "I got his autograph on a 100-yen note," he said. "Here, I'll show it to you." He opened up his wallet, and there on a folded, grimy bill was the neatly penned signature of the Japanese warlord. "He wished me a pleasant journey to America the last day I guarded him in his cell," Mr. Verl said. I ran and breathlessly told Paul, my old man, who seemed unimpressed. "I got a piece of Hitler's rug someplace at home," he said. I found it in a shoebox in a bedroom closet, a ragged shred of thick Persian carpet that once adorned the eagle's nest atop Berchtesgaden, where Adolf romped around with Eva Braun. When the old man was there with Patton's army after Germany surrendered, he cut off a piece of it with his bayonet for a souvenir. Also in the shoebox were a bronze star and a purple heart. For years now, this country has been caught up in remembrances of World War II. The big numbers, the 50th anniversaries of the invasion of Poland, Pearl Harbor, Stalingrad, Normandy, next year, Hiroshima. When I was a child in the 1950s, the memories of the war were so fresh and vivid in the minds of adults that they put everything in reference to it. My mother's comment on the baby boom comes to mind. Well, what did they expect? They took all the men off for 4 years and then let them all come home at once. Of course everybody had a baby. There was a black mark on my grandmother's kitchen ceiling over the stove. My aunt showed it to me and explained that Paul had been in the Tennessee maneuvers in the Smoky Mountains and had come home unexpectedly on furlough. Mama was so surprised when he walked in the back door, she threw the skillet up and it hit the ceiling. It was before TV had vanquished the world, and people still entertained one another by telling stories. Whenever we gathered, the men would sit around and talk about the war. All of my father's friends had been in it. Mr. Thomas, who said the main thing he remembered about the European theater was it was so cold you couldn't change your underwear. Mr. Jim, who was shot down in the Pacific and rescued by Filipino guerrillas, who paddled into the jungle and dug out canoes to find him. Mr. Ridley, who said the Japanese soldiers were so hungry that they captured one of them in the Chow Line in the Solomon Islands. Mr. Billy, who worked as a dental assistant in Italy and got dates with the local women by promising to fix their teeth. Mr. Ned and Mr. Jimmy, who flew bomber missions over Europe. My Uncle Joe, who still hated the Japanese. My cousin Willis, who still hated the Germans. My cousin Tommy, who still hated the Navy. Mr. Duncan, who lived down the road and who had had his arm shot off. He gets $50 a month, people would say. Every month for the rest of his life. Mr. Alec, who went looking for his brother Robert in another unit in Italy and learned that he had been killed when none of the other GIs would look him in the face. "I didn't cry or anything," he said. "I just lay out on a hill all night and looked at the stars." All the others they knew who went over and never came back. Mere wraiths to me. And then my old man, who got his high school diploma and his draft notice the same day and went overseas at 19 with George Patton. He got the Purple Heart by being shot as he was running away from the Germans after his gun jammed on him one night. "It was the biggest joke in the Third Army," he said. "Windrow got shot in the butt with a burp gun." My mother was not so blunt. "Paul has a scar from the war," she would say airily, "but he can't show it to anybody." She still has his wallet with the bullet hole clean through. That was how I learned about the war, from the stories those guys told late at night, around the campfire, or sitting at the July 4th picnic table, or standing on the steps of the Presbyterian church after the Sunday sermon. They say veterans don't like to talk about combat, but my old man told it all. The heroics and the cowardice, the triumphs and the wrenching fear, the homesickness, the bodies piled as high as houses, the boy from Texas who shot an unarmed German prisoner because he was afraid the war might end before he got to kill somebody, the little French children begging for chocolate by the roadsides, the pride of being among the first units to reach the besieged forces at Bastogne, the revulsion of stumbling over a dead man on an all-night march, the raucous ride back on the troop ship, the elation when it was all over. It taught me something that I always try to remember, that good and evil walk through the world hand in hand. I was the loneliest when we'd lay down to sleep out on the ground at night and they'd play taps, he told me. When the bugler played, it made me feel so lonesome. The bugler was a favorite of his. Later he saw him killed by shrapnel in a trench in France. The old man was in the pool hall one winter day and came across another man who had served with Patton. They began to reminisce. Paul was in a reflective mood and said, "I wonder where old General Patton is now." "I know where he is," the other man said quickly. "He's in hell, and he's giving all them Germans down there a hard time." When Paul died, the VFW sent out a fat, roomy-eyed bugler to play taps at his funeral. The old campaigner looked as if he needed a stiff belt just to get started, but he puffed up, put the bugle to his lips, and missed nary a note. Well, maybe he missed one or two. But Paul was right. It makes you feel so lonesome. Thank you.